So Universal Music has recently asked me to remix a really cool track from their back catalogue, and in doing so I made a really interesting sort of old school boom bap style beat I thought would be interesting to break down, as I've not really broken anything down in this style before. So this is a sample of the track I'm going to make. And then at the end, I'll drop the stems from Universal, which absolutely takes it to the next level. So the track demonstrates a couple of cool VSTs I've not shown on the channel before. It uses the drums, the ambience, and the bass from my last sample pack, Chill Drums Volume 1 with Be Calm. And there's a couple of VSTs and samples in there, which I'll go through when I get to them. And if you didn't see last week's video, the Chill Drum competition is still ongoing. All you got to do to enter is make a beat with the samples from Chill Drums Volume 1, submit it on Discord, and you'll be in a chance to win $100, $50, or $30 for the top 3 prizes. So definitely worth entering. You can make any genre, any style, you just got to use drums from the sample pack. But for now, onto the beat breakdown. So this is the project file. Usually with this sort of track, I'd start off with the chord progression, maybe the guitar, the piano. But for this beat, I started off with the drums and then went on to add the piano and the samples and textures afterwards. It just felt natural in this case, so I could start off with a nice groove and movement to the drums, lots of texture, some fills and rolls and stuff like that. And then from there, I built on the piano. So to start things off, I just threw on a sort of tape vinyl noise, just fills in the gaps a little bit. Obviously, some old school beats could have been recorded on tape decks and such, and you'll get the sort of tape hiss and that sort of thing. So onto the drums. On the drum bus at the moment, I've not fully mixed and mastered down the track, but I've got a Lux on there, which I've used a couple of times on this, and an auto filter, which sweeps it away for the sort of dropout section. So the Lux is a very sort of subtle compression saturation tool. Works amazing on drums, vocals, and even anything really. It can add a little bit of saturation and texture. It's from Clearground Audio. I think it's like $15. It's quite a cheap plugin, very simple plugin, but it adds a nice sort of texture. So I'll demonstrate what it does when I've opened up all the tracks. So first off, we've got a little snare. So the snare's got 2 different snares textured on top of each other. And that alternates as well, so it's not just a steady, stale one snare that throughout. Got a bit of texturing and a little roll in there as well. So these are all from the Chill Drum pack. And then later on, I do add in an extra little roll, which is just sliced out of one of the Chill Drum loops. So after that, we've got another little texture here, which is the hi-hat. So for the hi-hat, I've cut the top a bit and cut the lows off. Otherwise, it's just a bit too much. So I just want a subtle sort of muffled tap. And what I've also done, if you hit this button here, you can see the sort of timing of the tracks and you can push them back or forward. You can obviously do it yourself manually on the grid, but the hi-hat, when it was on perfectly on the beat, didn't quite sound right. So I just pushed it back 24 milliseconds, which sort of fit the groove a little bit nicer. I do also have a little fill that comes in sort of throughout the track. We've got another little hi-hat top, which is hitting with the hats. And it's got a little open hat as well at the end. And then finally on the drums, I've got this other bus, which has got some more textures that come in. So the first one was this sort of tapping noise, which can be a little bit louder in the mix, to be fair. And then I've also got this sort of soft, brushy tap. So this one's got some reverb, cut the lows, cut the highs, and again, cut the lows, cut the highs. I'm getting very specific with the sort of frequencies I want. I don't want anything to clash because I've got quite a lot going on. So when I group it all together, this is the sound you get. And as I said, I've got Lux on there, which is adding some saturation, so some harmonics at the high end, and some compression. I've got it cranked right up. And then you compare it with the kick, which again is from the pack. I use CLD Kick 3. So yeah, that covers the drum sounds, and then next up I went on to the piano. So first off, I've got the main piano. So I've actually played this in MIDI, and I've played it on the Contact Pure Noir Felt, and I've also added a little bit of spaced out reverb on there, which is in the sort of trippy section, which actually gives it quite an interesting sound. You could probably hear on the reverb tail, it gives a sort of modulated reverb, which is quite cool. And the way I've played it is, I've played the chords sort of like if you were playing the samples on a sampler. So what you could do is you can take the piano that you play, whatever it may be, if you freeze it and then flatten it, or even drag in your own piano sample. And what you can do is add a new MIDI track, drop on a simpler, drag in the sample, go over to slice by transient. You can reduce the sensitivity to get more chords, and then you can play it sort of like a sampler. So that's one way of getting the same sort of effect. But what I was doing was, rather than doing that, I just sort of played it in a similar sort of way to emulate it. So now I can take that MIDI and also play it on Lecco, which adds a little bit more top texture. That's the main loop. Add Lecco, gives it a more bright, crunchy texture. And then you also had this sort of top end. So on this one, I'm cutting the top, got a little altar boy in there, adding some drive, and then I've got spaced out reverb on there. I've got a couple of different top end lines. This is a different one, and they play sporadically throughout. And I also used a couple of trumpet samples I found on Splice in the same pack, the MC2 pack, like a muted trumpet sound, which added a nice little texture to the background. I used some vocal samples from one of my previous packs. She's got an autopan on there, giving it that choppy vibe. And that's sort of playing underneath, so you can't really hear it that much, but again, adding a little bit more texture to the track. And the next thing I did is to add a little bit more depth. I got a little labs patch, playing the same thing, playing the same MIDI as the main one, which is playing the tape orchestra wood loops. So this is woods samples that have been processed through tapes, and there's loads of different stuff, the strings as well, and all sorts in there. So again, adding a little bit more depth with that. And then from there we go to this little dropout section. So the drums cut out, and then onto the dropout. So we've got this. So what I've done is I've played a slight variation of the main chord progression, just playing the chords. Taken that, freezed it, flattened it, and then I've chopped the sample up so it's playing the first part of the chord and then it loops it like this. I've also taken the freeze track and reversed it so each chord sort of swells up. So like this. And I've taken this chord progression in Lecco, just laid it over the top. And then what I've done is I've taken the last two chops from this and I have thrown them onto another channel, and I'm using the cassette transport plugin from Waves Factory. And what you can do here is you can automate when the tape starts and stops. So I've just got the automation here. So it's playing the tape and stops the tape. And as it stops the tape, it sort of winds down and slowly stops. You can adjust how long it takes to wind down. You can add some noise and all sorts as well, speed it up, slow it down, whatever. But yeah, that's a little effect that helps it transition nicely into the drums again. I think that almost covers this. We've also got a couple of little textures, nothing major, from Arcade. So these are just some little sounds that add a little bit more depth towards the end. So this one is from the Stratos Downtime. And we've also got one from the By the Fire, which is the sort of like vocally texture. A little reverse swell and then like a little vocal texture. And now I had a couple more labs as well for more texture. One was this. So I've got the Labs Wood Hollow Crinkle, And I've also got the little synth cassette thing as well. So cassette synth, the real deal. Again, just adding a little bit more depth and texture with some sort of vintage retro pad sounds. And you just hear him in the background. So next up onto the bass, which is the Mondoloops bass that was in the last Chill Drums pack. So obviously this is available in Contact and it's available in the Ableton rack, which is the one I'm using. They're both slightly different because of the limitations of the programming. But for this, I'm using quite a distorted, sort of gritty bass. So you can add a bit of fuzz. So I'm adding just a little bit of fuzz and it cuts through the mix a little bit nicer. And then finally onto the rap vocals, which really finished this track off. So I was asked to remix a track called Gimme Yours by Az. So I sort of messed with the tempo a little bit, pitched the vocals down a little bit, threw them on this rap bus with a little bit of Lux, a little bit of convolution reverb. So this is a snippet of what it sounds like.
Personally nourish me properly with that inner city urban GC. I fuck with those beyond my age bracket, cause they analyze and map it, get the papers and stack it, leaving no trace to track it. Keeping thinking tactics is accurate. That max shit, living the lifestyle we feel relaxed. So in God I trust, I lust for an 850 deluxe, and until I touch $1 million plus, ain't much to.
So yeah, that's the track, a little bit different to what I usually make. So I'd love to know what you think of it in the comments down below. Should I do more like this? Go into it in a little bit more detail. And don't forget to get your entries into the Chill Drum Kit competition. It's been a little bit slower, I think, than some of the previous ones. So you've probably got less competition for the prizes. So yeah, do be sure to get them in. Thanks for watching and catch you next time.